are bored about what we're about to talk about, but what I want to talk about today is the greatest financial crisis in history, the greatest economic and financial crisis the world has ever experienced is coming. And it's going to lead to global tyranny. So we're going to talk about today why it's coming, what's going to cause this, the conditions that are present today, and then we're going to talk about the things that governments are preparing to put in place, what their solution to all of this is, because they see this coming as well, and they're already rolling the solution out, and it's really indistinguishable from what we read about in the book of Revelation. So I want to start here. So go back to August 15th, 1971. This is a very significant date. Prior to this time, after the aftermath of World War II, the dollar was linked to gold, and all the world's currencies were linked to the dollar. So the world was on a gold standard, meaning that our money had a fixed value. It had some sort of value associated with it relative to ounces of gold, which are real. But on this date, President Nixon issued an executive order ending the convertibility of the dollar into gold and made the dollar a fiat currency. And what that means is, well, it's just a piece of paper. And the only value it has is whatever value we think it has. It's based on faith. And on that day, all the world's currencies, for the first time in human history, all became fiat currencies. So we've had fiat currencies prior to this time, but usually those were in standalone nations, and there were others that were still on a gold standard. And to give an idea of what that could mean, well, here we have some pictures of Weimar Germany following World War I. We talked about this a little bit an hour ago. But prior to World War I, the German mark was linked to gold. It was on a gold standard. You could take your marks and turn them in and get gold in exchange. And after World War I, Germany was weighed down by all these war reparations they had to pay back. They no longer had a gold-backed currency, and so they just printed marks in order to pay their reparations, and this has destroyed the value of their currency. So here we see children using stacks of currency as blocks. We have wheelbarrows. There's a famous story that somebody went to the baker with a wheelbarrow filled with currency and went inside, and when they came out, someone had stolen their wheelbarrow but left the currency. Because the wheelbarrow was more valuable. And this is relevant to us because I want to look at this chart right here. This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. It's called M2 money supply. And all that is that's their measure of how many dollars are in existence. And if you notice, the line changes a lot the last few years. Between February 2020 and February 2022, 40% of all of the dollars in existence today were created in those 2 years in response to the pandemic. 40%. And so what happens when you do that? Well, you have a fixed number of currency units, and they're chasing the same number of goods and services. You're going to see prices go up. And so we've all seen that. You go to the grocery store, it costs a whole lot more than it did 5 years ago. Do almost anything, it costs a whole lot more than it did 5 years ago. But all of this currency went more places than just the grocery store. It also went into financial assets. And it's created the largest speculative bubble we've seen since right before the Great Crash in 1929. So we're going to look at some examples, some data to back that up. That's not just my claim, but we have here, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is called the Buffett indicator. It's named after Warren Buffett, who's acclaimed as the world's greatest investor. He's one of the richest men in the world. And it's looking at the value of the stock market relative to the value of the total economic output of the nation, so known as the GDP or gross domestic product. And that should usually be around 60% is considered fair value. Right now, we're at over 200%, the highest that this has ever been. If you look at that little blip in the middle of the screen, that was the 2000 dot-com bubble, where the NASDAQ declined 80% in the aftermath of that. So today's stock market dwarfs what we saw during the dot-com bubble. It dwarfs what we saw prior to 1929. We also have this indication here. So this is the price to sales ratio. It's a metric that values the stock market. And as you can see, this goes back to the 1940s. We've never been anywhere near that. That little bump more toward the right end of the screen, again, is the dot-com bubble. We're way higher now than we were then. And then here we have the top 7 stocks in the S&P 500 and the percentage weighting that they are. So many people are under the assumption that, well, if you have a retirement account and you buy the S&P 500, you're buying equal amounts of the 500 largest companies in existence. But in reality, that's weighted toward the stocks at the top. So the top 7 stocks account for 30% of the S&P 500, even though they're really around 1% of the companies in the S&P 500. And that's a big problem because, well, the Bible tells us that we should be diversified. It's from Ecclesiastes 11, verses 1 through 2. It says, "Send your grain across the seas, and in time profits will flow back to you, but divide your investments among many places, for you do not know what risks lie ahead." We've lost sight of this biblical principle. And many retirement accounts all over the nation, all over the world, are focused in what they think is a diversified portfolio, but it's really those 7 stocks we just looked at. And those 7 stocks are at extreme overvaluations. We're going to talk about how badly, but if you look at the average price to sales ratio for those 7 stocks, it's at 15. To put in perspective of what that means, well, there was a famous interview many years ago with Scott McNealy, who's the CEO of Sun Microsystems. And back during the dot-com bubble, Sun Microsystems was a darling. All these people on Wall Street were buying it. It went up to the moon, and it went to 10 times price to sales ratio. Remember, we just said the average of the top 7 right now, which is 30% of the stock market, is 15. But he said at 10, I have to give you all of my revenues as payback. I can't pay my employees, I can't pay taxes, I can't have research and development, no cost of goods sold. Every penny that comes into my business, I have to pay it all back to you just for you to break even. And I have to do that for 10 years. And he said, now, having done that, would you like to buy my stock at 64, which is what it was trading at then? And he said, do you realize how ridiculous this is? What were you thinking? And this is what happened to Sun Microsystems. So at 64, he's talking about is the top there, and it proceeded to decline 90%. Even though Sun Microsystems as a business continued to be a going concern, did just fine, but it was at extreme overvaluations, and that's where we see the market today. The top 7 stocks are worse off than that. We also have this chart here, so this shows how extremely weighted these top stocks are relative to the rest of the market. Worse than right before the Great Depression and the 1929 crash. So we're at extreme valuations in the stock market. But it's not the stock market alone. We've seen all this excess currency printing going into cryptocurrencies. I'm sure you've seen lots of people speculating on cryptocurrencies. Well, here's just one example. This is called Dogecoin. Might sound familiar because, as many of us know, Elon Musk heads up the Department of Government Efficiency called Doge. That's basically named after this meme coin. Dogecoin was created in 2013 as a joke. The two people that created it were trying to mock the speculation in cryptocurrencies, so they created a worthless joke coin. And at its height, back in 2021, which you'd note, the market treated it as worthless from 2013 right up until the time all this currency printing took place. And then it went to $100 billion in net value at its peak. Right now, it's worth $24 billion. It has no use. It's just speculation. People are buying it because they think somebody else will pay a higher price later. It's the only reason they're buying it. And it's not just cryptocurrencies and stocks, but residential real estate as well. So here we see a chart of the median price of a home relative to the median household income. And right now, we're at all-time highs. It's never been higher. This blip over here, that was the housing bubble that caused the great financial crisis. And it pales in comparison to what we see right now. And so all of this is going to lead to a major crash in the very near future. All we need is the economy to slow down, and then all of this house of cards starts to fall down around it. We see here another chart that shows how out of sorts this is. We have the orange line is how much income is required to buy the median house. And the blue line is what the actual income, median income is. And when that orange line is higher than the blue line, it means housing is unaffordable. It's not as affordable as it should be. And as you can see, it's at all-time highs. And so what's going on in the economy? Well, let's look at what all of this is going to do, ultimately, is lead to not inflation, as we hear in the media, at least not in the immediate term, but a great crash that leads to a deflationary spiral similar to what we saw in the Great Depression. And we're already seeing it in some places, including China, the world's second largest economy. So for years and years, you probably heard about this. China, in order to employ people, in order to try to move people from the farms into the big cities, they built these large cities called ghost cities. Nobody lived in them. The plan was, well, maybe somebody will live in them one day. A lot of them, nobody lives in to this day. And they just built city after city that nobody lived in order to employ people. And then they would say, well, the economy's growing. And we've all heard, oh, China's economy is growing so much. Well, yeah, they're building a bunch of cities nobody's living in. It grows until it doesn't. And we've reached that point. So now China is locked in this deflationary spiral. Since 2021, they've lost $18 trillion in real estate wealth. To put that in perspective, the United States during the great financial crisis lost $12 trillion. So they've already lost 50% more in their real estate bust than we lost during the great financial crisis. We see this deflation taking hold of China, and there's no sign they're getting out of it. It's not just China. We see this in Germany as well. Germany is the third largest economy in the world. And following the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, it disrupted gas flows, Russian gas flows into the German economy, which was very reliant on cheap, affordable, reliable flows of energy from Russia. And this has had an enormous impact on their economy. It's led to the deindustrialization of Germany. So this is a headline from back in 2022. It says 4 German companies, all over 125 years old, declared insolvent in 24 hours. So think about what that means. These companies, they survived World War I, the Weimar hyperinflation we looked at a moment ago, the rise of Nazi Germany, the complete destruction of Germany following World War II, everything ever since. But now, they're all going out of business. And they were in all different industries. And we're seeing this happen all over Germany. We're seeing German industrial giants shedding jobs. They're moving their companies overseas because there is no longer cheap, reliable energy in Germany based on a number of factors, green policies that are being put forward by their government, but in particular, this loss of reliable Russian energy. And if you're a long-term planner, if you own a business, you're looking at that and you're saying, well, I don't know what these energy prices are all over the place. I don't know whether the energy will be available. So we're better off moving these factories somewhere else. And that's exactly what they're doing. So we see the German economy, the third largest economy, locked in inflation as well. Here this shows the decline in industrial production in Germany and how that's happening. It's Other than the pandemic where we saw that spike downward, we're just seeing this decline in German industrial production. Again, we're seeing them stuck. They say stagnation. The economy in Germany is contracting. They are locked in the same deflationary spiral that China is. About the world's fourth largest economy, we have Japan. Japan has been in deflation for over 30 years, struggling to get out of it. Now they're in a currency crisis because in that deflationary crisis, believe it or not, with all the trillions of dollars in debt that the United States has, our debt is nothing compared to what they have in Japan. Relative to our income, our debt here is 120% of GDP. Theirs is 266% of GDP. If they allowed interest rates to float and be what they should, the interest they would have to pay on their debt would completely destroy their economy. So what they've been doing is they've been printing their currency, printing the yen in order to buy their government bonds back to push the interest rates down. But now they're at a point where they're stuck at a fork in the road. They're seeing their bond prices, those interest rates go up all across the board. And they're in the midst of a currency crisis. And this is why we saw back in August last year the largest two-day decline in Japanese stock market history. There's no way out for Japan. They can raise rates, which they're trying to do now in order to prevent inflation and potentially hyperinflation of their currency due to all these years of mismanagement. But if they do that, well, they're going to destroy the entire economy and their debt. They're going to destroy their banking system because their banking system has been relying on these lower rates. And so we've got major problems in the fourth largest economy as well. So all that's been holding up the global economy for the past couple of years has been the United States. The United States has been growing, although we know that, again, if you have to afford groceries, it hasn't been the great economy they've been telling us it is. But now we're starting to head that same path as well. So here's a chart of the Fed funds rate. So when you hear in the news media they say the Federal Reserve is going to raise rates, this is what they're talking about. This is Fed funds rate. And you can see it's gone up from around 0 a few years ago to 5% or so, which is nothing compared to what it was in the early 80s, so no big deal. But what is a big deal is the percentage change when they started raising rates. So if we look at the same chart, but we look at the year-over-year percentage change that took place, you notice anything on that chart? We have the previous largest increase year-over-year was back in 1959 at 410%. Back here where they started raising rates, we had over 5,612% year-over-year change. That's a sudden shock to the financial system. So the news media tells us, oh, they're bringing the economy into a soft landing. No, they're not. They're flying a plane into the side of a mountain. And this type of activity comes with a lag, and we're starting to feel the effects of that lag now. So here we have another chart from the Federal Reserve. This shows what's called the yield curve. And the yield curve, going all the way back to when Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold, whenever the yield curve is inverted, which means it's below the black line, it goes negative, that's a sign that a recession is coming once the yield curve uninverts. And we see all those gray lines vertically indicate where recessions took place. Well, we've had the longest yield curve inversion in history, longer than the one that took place before the Great Depression. And back in September, it uninverted, signaling recession lies ahead. And I would say, frankly, depression lies ahead. And then we have this. This is the latest data from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta for the quarter that we're in right now, January, February, March. Just at the beginning of February, they said, well, the economy is growing 3.9%. That's great. And then they've changed their mind, and now, well, the economy is actually contracting 2.4%. So So economic activity has fallen off a cliff right now in the United States. And we already had the second and third largest economies in the world in a deflationary spiral. Now we have contraction in the United States, the world's largest economy. We had the fourth largest economy in the world in the midst of a currency crisis. So what does all this mean? It means we're heading into a global synchronized depression, greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression. And we're doing that in the midst of record debt loads across the board, whether it's the government, whether it's individuals, and the amount of debt load they have, whether it's credit card debt at all-time highs. And when this happens, well, all of this debt can't be paid back, and what can't be paid back won't be paid back. And that has enormous implications for our economy, in particular, our banking system. So here we have a chart from the FDIC. This is unrealized losses at U.S. banks, so within the U.S. banking system. This means, for instance, the bank, let's say they went out and they bought a U.S. Treasury when interest rates were 1%. But when interest rates go up, the value of those bonds, the face value goes down. And so those unrealized losses are recognized by that downturn we see there. Now notice that little blip over there in 2008, that was the great financial crisis. It almost destroyed everything. And this is where we are today. And they say, well, it's no big deal because these are unrealized losses. And that's true. They're unrealized losses until they're realized. And so think about Silicon Valley Bank. A couple of years ago, we heard about them. There was a run on their bank. They had a balance sheet that looked a lot like this with unrealized losses. It's no problem. We'll hold these forever. But once the customers showed up and said, give me my cash back, they had to sell these things at a loss. So what happens when everybody starts going to the bank and says, I want my cash back, and these losses become realized? And we may think that that's not going to happen, but it's a very real possibility. We also have this as well threatening U.S. banks. So the Florida Atlantic University has studied the impact of commercial real estate on the banking system. So we've all heard about post-COVID, a lot of people are working from home, they're not going into the office. A lot of this office space is sitting unused, and it's worth less than it was before, and now interest rates have gone up. 87% of commercial real estate is financed on interest-only 5-year loans. And we know how interest-only loans turned out during the great financial crisis, but now as these loans need to be rolled over, they need to be rolled over at higher rates on buildings that aren't cash flowing because they don't have the tenants they used to have. And so this study looked at what banks are most vulnerable. And they said if you have commercial real estate exposure greater than 300% of your equity, that's what bank regulators consider make you a greater risk of going under, of your bank failure. And they found that 59 of the 158 largest banks in the country meet that criteria right now. And out of all banks, and you can read the numbers here, we have 216 have exposures of greater than 600%, so twice as worse off is what puts them at greater risk for failure. So our banking system is sick. It's in a lot of trouble. And all of our leaders, though, would assure us, although that's not the case. So if we remember back 2 years ago when Silicon Valley Bank failed, we saw the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. And the Treasury Secretary at the time, Janet Yellen, she went before Congress and said, banking system sound, nothing to worry about. No problems here, everything's just fine. She said, I can reassure members of the committee our banking system remains sound and that Americans can feel confident their deposits will be there when they need them. That was in March of 2023. And less than a year later, she went before Congress. This would have been February 2024, so 11 months later, and she said, I'll never forget referring to the weekend that Silicon Valley Bank failed. We did everything we could to put together a package of measures that would stop what could have become a run on the banking system to the huge detriment of our economy, hardworking Americans and businesses. Guys, they're gonna lie to you. They're not going to tell you the truth until it's apparent to everyone the dangers of the banking system. How about this? This may be why Silicon Valley Bank had some problems. Most people don't know this. Back during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve changed reserve requirements for banks to zero, meaning they don't have to have any cash on hand. They can lend all of it out, every single penny, and they do, and more. So that's why it's maybe hard if you go to the bank and want a large amount of cash. They say, well, call us back tomorrow. We'll get ready, because it's not there. They don't have it. And then on top of that, we have what's called a global derivatives complex that's estimated to be $1 to $4 quadrillion. I can't even comprehend how big that is. Now, what are derivatives? Well, derivatives are basically just bets in a casino. They give it a fancy name, but it's insurance policies for people that own things. So, for instance, I could say, well, I want to take out an insurance policy in case my neighbor's house burns down. So if his house burns down, I get paid. And they go, well, there's low likelihood that'll happen, so you can buy that for $1 and it'll pay off at $1 million, right? And then the company that gives you that bet takes that bet. They turn around and they say, well, we need to insure ourselves in case his neighbor's house burns down. So they go to another bank and they say, will you insure us in case his neighbor's house burns down? Well, sure. And then they turn around and say, well, we need to insure ourselves in case this happens. And it's just a big circle. And when the neighbor's house actually burns down, they all turn to each other for the payout. And it can't be done. It's not there. That's what we're looking at. And 87% of all the derivatives in existence today are held by just 4 banks, 4 largest banks in America. So what happens if one of those banks fails? Well, the whole global financial system crumbles. So guys, this is how precarious the situation is. It's a house of cards. I like to say it's a house of cards built on a Ponzi scheme, built on a foundation of lies. I mean, the whole thing it's corrupt. And when we have a situation like that, we see risk accelerate. So there's something called counterparty risk, which is just what we talked about. So if I think that you're about to go bankrupt, well, I'm probably not going to lend you the money that you want me to lend you. If you think I'm going to go bankrupt, you're probably not going to lend to me either. And so when we have this spread throughout the financial system, it's called financial contagion, and it leads to a credit freeze. It means all these institutions stop lending to one another. And we were on the brink of this back in 2008, following the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And what that means is, it would mean that all credit comes to a halt. And so if you think the economy shut down during the pandemic, well, that's nothing compared to what would happen if we saw a credit freeze, because everything stops. Everything runs on credit. Farmer, he takes out credit to get some cows. The guy that comes to get the milk, he takes out credit in order to get the trucks, in order to ship it. The whole supply chain from farm to grocery store, farm to restaurant, everything has credit every step of the way at use. And if that credit freezes, well, the trucks stop running. And so that's what we're facing right now, and we've seen this in the past. We saw this during the Great Depression. It was called a bank holiday. It's not like a bank holiday like we would think of today, where nobody works that Monday at the bank. It means they shut the banking system down until they can restore order, until they can restore confidence in the banking system. And so we're going to see that again, in my opinion, in the near future when we see this credit freeze. And so we talked earlier this morning about being prepared. a good idea to be prepared to have a deep pantry. Fill up your gas tank whenever you get a chance, because if we get a credit freeze, I don't know how long it would last. If we get this bank holiday, it could last a few days, it could last 3 or 4 weeks. I don't think it would probably last more than that. But during that time, all the trucks are going to stop. So that means whatever's at the grocery store is what's there, and once it's gone, it's not coming back until the system unfreezes and starts to move again. Whatever's at the gas station is going to be taken out. It'll be gone until it comes back. And so we're looking at a global crisis, likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression. What we're also looking at is a bunch of governments that have already developed the solution for us, and that very kind of them. So they've already told us what their solution to all of this is going to be. They want central bank digital currencies. So you see a bunch of headlines here. This is all over the world. 97% of the world's population lives in a nation where they're either developing or they've already rolled out central bank digital currencies. And in fact, just last week, the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she's there on the left, she said, there will be a digital euro, a central bank digital currency in the European Union this October. We're rolling it out. And just like Janet Yellen, wasn't that long ago, maybe a year ago, she said, you're a conspiracy theorist if you think we're going to roll out a central bank digital currency. We're not going to do that. Now she comes out, and in this press conference on March 6th, she said, oh yeah, we've been working on this for years. My predecessor started it. I plan to finish it. It's coming in October. And then she says, but don't worry, all of these people that say that we're going to track everything, we're not. We're not going to track anything. And you can still use cash. This is a complement to cash. It's not instead of cash. Yet the European Union has enacted limits on how much cash you can use. And they've said the reason for doing that is, well, money launderers and criminals, they use cash. So are we really to expect they'll roll out a central bank digital currency that gives them insight into every transaction that takes place, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to look for money launderers using this. We're just doing this for fun. No, they're going to be tracking every single transaction with insight into that. And worse than that, a central bank digital currency is programmable, which means they can decide, well, you know what, we don't like the post that you put on Facebook last week. So just to show you that you shouldn't do that in the future, well, your central bank digital currency, for the next month, it only works within a mile of your home. So you're effectively under house arrest. And they can even go to the point of saying, you know what, it's cut off altogether. You don't have access to your bank account anymore because you haven't done what we want you to do. And guys, this is building a system that's really indistinguishable from what we read about in Revelation 13 with the mark of the beast. And it's in tandem with other things too, like digital ID. So here we had this. It's from the European Commission from 2024. It says the rules on establishing a European digital identity entered into force on Monday. Again, this was 2 years ago, or a year ago. This will pave the way for all EU citizens and residents to benefit, right? Aren't they so lucky? To benefit from a personal European digital identity wallet in 2026. So this gives them more control over everyone. And it's of note that when Christine Lagarde came out last week and said, yep, we're going to roll out the central bank digital currency, she said, well, yeah, but we need to get all the stakeholders to buy in first. And she mentioned those were the European Council, the European Commission, European Parliament. There was no mention of European citizens. They're not stakeholders. Just her and her group, they're the stakeholders. And they want to roll out central bank digital currency and digital IDs. And we see this everywhere. We see this in the United States. 14 states now have digital IDs. We're from Virginia. I didn't realize until I was reading this article that we had one in Virginia. And right now they say, well, these things are voluntary. And they are, until they're not. and one day soon they will be not. And then we see this as well, tokenized assets. We talked a little bit about that this morning, but they want to tokenize not just your money, but everything you could possibly buy with it, which gives them even more insight into everything that you're doing. So these three things, digital IDs, tokenized assets, central bank digital currencies, they create a system of tyranny that's indistinguishable in capability and function from what we read right here in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17. This is the mark of the beast that we hear about. It says, he required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Now, this system won't come in full until the tribulation period, and we don't know all of the details about it. But what we're seeing put in place right now, right in front of us, is indistinguishable in capability and function from this system. We're seeing the foundation laid, we're seeing the groundwork put in place, so that when the tribulation does come, the Antichrist, the false prophet, they can just flip a switch, turn it on, because it's already there. And they're going to use this financial crisis that's coming to push everybody into the system. For instance, they'll tell us that, as they just did in that last slide, it's a benefit, right? Everybody will be able to benefit from this. So if you think back to the great financial crisis, there was a man named Bernie Madoff who had run the largest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world. He defrauded investors out of millions of dollars. They'll be able to say, well, if we had central bank digital currency, we would have known this. We would have seen that Bernie Madoff took investor cash, and instead of investing it, he bought a yacht. And he bought a home out in Europe and another mansion in the Hamptons. And he did all these things with it, but he wasn't investing the cash, and we could have protected you. It's to your benefit to have this. We can prevent this type of thing from happening in the future. And once they get enough people to buy into that, to walk into that system, they force the rest of us into it, and the door is closed. There's no escape from this. This is global tyranny once we see this. And so again, this is the infrastructure they're putting in place right now for the mark of the beast system, indistinguishable. And when we look at this, and we see this system coming into being, that the mark of the beast, how is it possible outside of the supernatural prior to now to track every transaction, every buy-sell transaction, to be able to cut off who can buy or sell? It was impossible. But now we can see how it's possible outside of the supernatural. And when you couple that with the other signs that we see that Jesus and the prophets pointed to, nation of Israel back in the land, the Jewish people back in control of Jerusalem, the gospel being preached all over the world, signs we talked about last night, all sorts of signs. Well, Jesus said, when you see all these things taking place, you can know that his return is very near, right at the door. Jesus is telling us, I'm right at the door. He didn't say, when you see all these things, a couple centuries might go by. Or maybe I'll change my mind. No, he said, when you see all these things take place, you can know that I'm very near, right at the door. So I know some of this can sound scary and frightening, but we have an opportunity that past generations never had. And that opportunity is to preach the gospel in a way that other generations couldn't. How many people do you know who have built their lives on the shifting sands of my retirement account, my career, all of these worldly things? When the storm comes, they're going to be swept away. And we need to be there for those people who say, why is it that you're so calm? Everything got swept away from you too. Why are you so calm? And you say, because I've built my life upon the rock, the solid foundation of Jesus Christ. So the storms of this life don't impact me, and you can have that too. You can have that same peace that surpasses all understanding if you come to Jesus and you build your life on Jesus. We have opportunities when it comes to central bank digital currency. If you see somebody spending cash, let's say you're at the store and somebody's spending cash, say, don't get used to doing that. What do you mean? Well, you know they're going to roll out central bank digital currency. They're going to get rid of cash. Well, I've heard of that. Maybe they'll listen to you. Maybe once you say, oh, you know, this was written about in the Bible almost 2,000 years ago in the book of Revelation. Maybe they say, I don't want to hear about that. But that's fine. You plant a seed. Plant those seeds. You don't have to see the seed grow to fruition. Let God handle all of that. He'll send other people to water and nurture and grow. But plant seeds, because those people, I guarantee you, when they see this come into effect, they'll say, I remember that person told me this was coming, and it was in the Bible, and they were right. They also said that the Bible foretold the coming, the life, the times, the death, the resurrection of a Messiah, and all of those things were fulfilled in the life of Jesus. Maybe they were right about that too. So guys, plant seeds every opportunity you get, every person you come into contact with, because we are in the season of the Lord's return. That's not my opinion. That's what Jesus himself tells us. When you begin to see all these things, know I am near, I am right at the door. Jesus is at the door, and we need to be occupied and doing his work with whatever time we have left. So guys, I want to thank you for having our family here. This has been just a blessing to be able to come to your church. You have the most amazing church with a wonderful pastor, unapologetically preaching the Word of God and teaching about these things so that you're prepared and you can go out and help people. We talked this morning about our family saw COVID coming, and we were able to prepare for that. Well, it doesn't mean we hoarded a bunch of stuff in our house, but we had friends and family that said, we got 8 people in our house and no toilet paper. And we said, we're bringing some over right now because we were prepared. So when we're prepared for these things, when you're grounded in Jesus, when you build your life upon the solid rock of Jesus Christ, these storms won't impact you the way they'll impact other people who have built their lives on shifting sand. And we need to be prepared to help those people, to be a resource for those people, and to lead them to Christ. So again, guys, I thank you for having us. We're so thankful. You've just been a blessing and an encouragement to our family, and we can't thank you enough for having us here.
Well, as we get ready to finish up today, and all this information, you say, man, Lee, I'm overwhelmed with all this, and I understand that. But, why? Why would, and the question comes, okay, Lord, why would you allow all this happen? One reason. He loves you. Loves you more than anything else in this world. And this is why when he went into Egypt, he sent Moses into Egypt, and there was 10 plagues. But why, and he did away with all those. And why did he do that? Because that was the things that those people, why did he attack the Nile River? Why did he bring in flies and all the, because those were the things that the people were worshiping. So what's he trying to say to us? Just what he just told us. The very thing that you're trusting. I tell you, we're living in a day where people in the United States have heard the gospel, and they've heard the gospel, and they've heard the gospel, and all of a sudden, guess what they do? Their heart becomes hard. And they say, well, we've heard that before. No. Do you really know Jesus? And I quoted what it said last night from the book of Philippians, chapter 3, where Paul says he's come to the place in his life. He says, when Jesus comes back, that I might be found in him, not having my own righteousness, which is from the law or from which anything else what I'm trusting in, that I may be found in him, not having my own righteousness, but the righteousness which is by faith in Jesus Christ. That scares me to death, that there are those people that have never had that born-again experience with Jesus. That's the difference. Do you know? Do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt? And you know what that means? That means for some of us has got to put away all of our inhibitions and everything else, and we've got to come to a place where we don't care about what anybody else says. We get out of our seat and we say, Jesus, I want you more than I care about what people think. That's got to be the difference. So I'm just simply saying to you today, if you're here and you've never come to Jesus, maybe you're not a member of our church, and we'd love to have you and love you to be part of it, but I don't care about that. What I care about is you coming to know Christ as your Lord and Savior. Do you know that? 1 John tells us, he that hath the Son hath life. He that hath not the Son hath not life. Do you have the Son? That's a simple question. God has made this thing so absolute simple. Do you have the Son? Do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're His? Because if you don't, I'm giving you the opportunity, and I believe that if you miss out on this, God will remind you when you were sitting in Grace Bible Church that Sunday morning, and I spoke to you. I said to you, you need to come. Because Jesus said, if I will confess Him before men, He will confess me before the Father.